History remembers many rulers, but very few managed to control how they would be remembered for thousands of years. And Ramses II was one of those rare figures who understood that power was not only about armies and battles, but also about image, memory, and repetition. When Ramses came to the throne, Egypt was already a strong and wealthy kingdom with deep traditions, powerful gods, and experienced armies. Yet the world beyond Egypt was changing, alliances were shifting, and new powers were rising, especially in the north, where the Hittite Empire was expanding and challenging Egyptian influence. In the Levant Ramses understood early that ruling Egypt required more than military strength. He believed people needed to see power everywhere and feel that their ruler was permanent, unchangeable, and chosen by the gods. So from the very beginning of his reign, he began building temples, statues, cities, and monuments on a scale never seen before, all carrying his name and his image wherever people traveled. In Egypt, they saw Ramses, his face carved into stone, his victories described in reliefs, his titles repeated endlessly. This was not only pride, it was a deliberate strategy to shape how the present and the future would remember him, and to make his rule feel eternal despite the monuments. War could not be avoided. Tensions grew along Egypt's northern borders. Vassal states changed loyalties. Messages arrived warning of Hittite movements. And eventually, the two great powers of the ancient world moved toward direct confrontation. These confrontations took place near the city of Kadesh, where Ramses marched north with confidence, leading one of the largest armies Egypt had ever assembled. Trusting his intelligence, his gods, and his own judgment, but confidence can be dangerous. And Ramses was misled by false information, believing the enemy was far away, when in reality the Hittite forces were already waiting for him. And when the attack came, it was sudden, violent, and chaotic at Kadesh. Ramses advanced too far ahead of his main forces. His army became divided, and for a brief moment, the pharaoh found himself isolated, surrounded by enemy chariots. With defeat appearing very real, Egyptian records later described this moment as heroic, showing Ramses fighting alone, saved by the gods, and turning disaster into victory. But historians believe the truth was far more complex. The battle was brutal, confused, and ended without a clear winner. What mattered most to Ramses was not the outcome of the battle, but the story that followed when he returned to Egypt. Walls were carved, temples were decorated, and poems were written, all repeating the same message. Ramses was victorious. Ramses was invincible. Ramses was chosen. This version of events was repeated so often that it became accepted truth. And behind the public image, Egypt and the Hittites made a decision that would change history, choosing diplomacy over endless war, and creating the first known peace treaty in recorded history. Peace brought stability. Trade increased, borders settled, and Egypt entered a long period of prosperity. Ramses ruled for more than 60 years, long enough to become a living legend. Generations grew up knowing no other ruler, and foreign kings treated him as a constant. Foreseen his later years, age finally caught up with Ramses. His body weakened, his energy faded, and the empire he had built became harder to control. And when he died, Egypt lost not just a king, but a symbol. No successor could replace his authority or his presence. Slowly, Egypt began to decline, but Ramses endured through his statues, his temples, and his name, which survived longer than most civilizations. And even today, when people imagine ancient Egypt, they often imagine the world Ramses created. Ramses II did not only rule Egypt, he mastered legacy, showing that history is shaped not only by events, but by those who control how those events are remembered. As peace settled across Egypt, Ramses focused his energy inward, strengthening the kingdom from within. He understood that lasting power depended on stability, food supply, religion, and loyalty. Not only on one of Ramses' greatest priorities was construction. He believed buildings could speak louder than words. Temples were expanded, new sanctuaries were raised, and old monuments were reshaped to reflect his reign. Every structure served a purpose: to inspire awe, obedience, and belief. Ramses rebuilt parts of Karnak and Luxor, adding colossal statues of himself, towering columns, and long walls filled with carved scenes of victory and divine approval. These images were not subtle. They were designed to overwhelm anyone who entered these sacred spaces. Far to the south, at Abu Simbel, Ramses ordered a temple carved directly into the rock, for massive seated statues of himself guarded the entrance, each meant to project eternal strength. Even the rising sun was engineered to illuminate the inner sanctuary on specific days, reinforcing the idea that Ramses ruled in harmony with the cosmos. Religion and kingship were deeply connected in Egypt. Ramses presented himself not only as a servant of the gods, but as their chosen representative on earth. Priests supported this image, rituals reinforced it, and festivals celebrated the pharaoh as both human and divine. Throughout these religious displays, Ramses ensured loyalty. People believed stability depended on his presence, that chaos would return without him, and this belief became one of his greatest sources of power. Administration was equally important. Egypt was vast, stretching from the Mediterranean to Nubia. Governing such a land required skilled officials, scribes, and regional governors. Ramses placed trusted individuals in key positions, often members of his own family, ensuring obedience and control. Many of Ramses' sons were appointed to high offices, including military commands and priesthoods. This strengthened his grip on power, but it also created tension as potential heirs competed for favor. While the pharaoh continued to live far longer than expected as the years passed, Ramses outlived many of his children. Succession became uncertain, yet his long reign masked these problems. The system continued to function, largely because Ramses himself remained the center of authority. Foreign relations remained stable. Neighboring rulers sent gifts, letters, and tribute. Egypt was respected, feared, and admired. Ramses had successfully positioned himself as the dominant figure of his era. However, the world beyond Egypt did not remain still. New populations were moving, resources shifted, and pressures slowly built along trade routes and borders. Signs of future instability were present, even if they were not yet visible to Most in his final decades. Ramses became increasingly distant from direct governance. Age limited his movement, and decisions were delegated to officials and family members. The pharaoh who once led armies now ruled through ceremony and tradition despite his declining strength. His image remained powerful. Statues continued to be raised, inscriptions continued to praise him, and Egypt continued to function under the weight of his legacy when Ramses eventually died. After more than 6 decades on the throne, Egypt entered a new phase. The transition revealed how much the kingdom had depended on a single individual. Without Ramses, the system struggled to adapt. Later rulers attempted to imitate him, copying his monuments, adopting his name, and presenting themselves as heirs to his greatness. But imitation could not replace authority, and Egypt slowly began to lose its dominance. Yet Ramses never truly disappeared. His monuments endured, his name echoed through history, and his image became inseparable from the idea of ancient Egypt itself. Even today, when people imagine the power, scale, and mystery of the pharaohs, they are often seeing the world Ramses created, a world built on stone, belief, and carefully crafted memory. Ramses II showed that leadership in the ancient world was not only about survival, but about shaping perception, controlling narrative, and ensuring that long after death, the ruler would still be present. Ramses' relationship with warfare did not end at Kadesh. Even after peace with the Hittites, Egypt remained a military power, and Ramses made sure his armies stayed visible, disciplined, and respected across the region. Military camps were maintained, fortresses guarded borders, and regular campaigns were launched into Nubia and Libya, not always for conquest, but to remind neighboring regions of Egyptian strength. In Nubia, Ramses focused on control rather than destruction. Gold mines were secured, trade routes protected, and local leaders integrated into the Egyptian system. This approach ensured a steady flow of resources that fueled Egypt's wealth. In the West, Libyan tribes tested Egypt's borders. Raids and migrations forced Ramses to respond. Fortifications were strengthened and military presence increased, showing that Egypt would not tolerate instability. Ramses understood that peace was effective only when backed by force. Diplomacy worked best when enemies knew Egypt could still strike. This balance between strength and restraint defined much of his rule. He did not seek endless war, but he ensured Egypt never appeared weak. As the years passed, Ramses became a symbol not just of Egypt, but of order itself. Chaos was associated with absence of his authority, while stability was linked directly to his presence. This idea was carefully cultivated through art, religion, and ceremony. Festivals celebrated the longevity of his reign. Jubilees reinforced the message that Ramses was favored by the gods and destined to rule longer than ordinary men. This festival, traditionally celebrated after 30 years of rule, was held multiple times during Ramses' reign, each celebration reminding the people that their pharaoh remained strong, chosen, and divinely supported. These ceremonies were powerful psychological tools. They reassured the population and discouraged dissent, reinforcing the belief that Egypt's prosperity depended entirely on Ramses. However, beneath this carefully maintained image, Cracks slowly formed, the bureaucracy grew heavy, corruption increased, and decision-making slowed as power concentrated around aging leadership. Ramses' long reign created stability, but it also delayed renewal. Younger leaders waited decades for authority, innovation slowed, and the system became dependent on tradition rather than adaptability. When Ramses finally passed away, the sudden absence of his presence exposed these weaknesses. Successors lacked experience, confidence, and legitimacy. Internal challenges increased, foreign pressures grew, and Egypt's influence gradually weakened, not through sudden collapse, but through slow erosion. Despite this decline, Ramses' legacy remained unmatched. His monuments dominated the landscape, his name filled inscriptions, and his version of history continued to shape understanding of the past. Even Greek and Roman visitors centuries later admired his achievements, often mistaking his statues for gods and retelling stories of his greatness. Modern archaeology would later confirm the scale of his ambition, uncovering temples, reliefs, and inscriptions that revealed how carefully Ramses constructed his image. Some historians criticize him for exaggeration, propaganda, and manipulation of history. Others recognize his genius in understanding human perception and memory. Ramses was neither purely hero nor villain. He was a product of his time, a ruler who mastered the tools available to him: war, religion, art, and narrative. His true achievement was not a single battle or monument, but the creation of a legacy so powerful that his name became synonymous with ancient Egypt itself. Ramses II showed the ancient world that immortality was possible, not through eternal life, but through remembrance. As time moved forward, the world that Ramses had dominated slowly transformed. New peoples migrated across the eastern Mediterranean, trade networks shifted, and pressure began to build on the old systems that had supported great empires. Although Ramses never lived to see the full consequences, the foundations laid during his reign shaped what followed, both the strengths and the weaknesses of Egypt in the generations after him. The peace with the Hittites remained one of his most lasting achievements. It showed that diplomacy could succeed where war could not, and that balance of power could preserve stability longer than conquest. This treaty influenced later rulers across the ancient world, proving that written agreements could restrain violence. Even between rival empires, Ramses' personal life was as vast as his public legacy. He had many wives, many children, and an extended royal household that functioned like a state within a state. Royal marriages were political tools, strengthening alliances and reinforcing loyalty. Ramses used them carefully, blending family and state interests. However, the size of his household created complications. Succession became delayed. Heirs aged while waiting, and authority remained concentrated in one individual for too long. This concentration of power made Ramses indispensable, but it also meant the system struggled once he was gone. After his death, Egypt entered a period of gradual decline, not immediate collapse, but steady weakening. Resources stretched thinner, borders became harder to defend, and internal cohesion faded. Later pharaohs attempted to revive his image, copying his statues, reusing his monuments, and even adopting his name. hoping to inherit some of his authority. Yet imitation could not replace experience, and symbolism alone could not sustain an empire without strong leadership. Despite this, Ramses never vanished from memory. Travelers centuries later stood before his statues in awe. Storytellers repeated his name, and his image survived even as Egypt changed rulers. And dynasties. Modern historians continue to debate his true greatness. Some argue he exaggerated victories and ruled through propaganda. Others point to the unprecedented stability and prosperity of his reign, but the views contain truth. Ramses was a master of narrative, but he also delivered real results: peace, wealth, and cultural dominance. His reign demonstrates that power is not a single act, but a continuous process maintained through action, belief, and repetition. Ramses understood human nature deeply. He knew people follow strength, trust familiarity, and remember what they see repeatedly. By placing himself everywhere, in stone, in ritual, in story, he ensured that forgetting him would be impossible. In the end, Ramses II did not conquer death, but he shaped memories so effectively that his presence endured long after his body was gone. His legacy reminds us that history is not only written by those who act, but by those who control how their actions are remembered. As the memory of Ramses continued to dominate Egypt, the world beyond its borders moved toward instability. Systems that had supported trade, diplomacy, and food supply for centuries began to weaken, and signs of stress appeared across the eastern Mediterranean. Long-distance trade routes that once connected Egypt to Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean became less reliable. Migrations increased, and smaller kingdoms struggled to survive. These pressures would later contribute to what historians call the Bronze Age collapse. Although Ramses ruled before this collapse fully unfolded, his long reign delayed the impact for Egypt. The structures he built provided temporary stability, but they could not stop wider regional change. After his death, Egypt faced challenges that no monument could solve. Climate fluctuations reduced harvests, economic pressure increased, and military resources were stretched thin. Without a leader of Ramses' stature, decision-making slowed, responses became reactive rather than strategic, and Egypt gradually lost its dominant position. In the ancient world still, Ramses remained the standard. Ramses remained the standard against which all later pharaohs were measured. His reign became the idealized past, a golden age that rulers tried to recreate but could never fully restore. Priests, scribes, and officials continued to preserve his image. Temples maintained his statues, and religious rituals kept his memory alive, linking stability to the age of Ramses. Foreign visitors centuries later stood before his monuments and assumed Egypt had always been this powerful, unaware that they were witnessing a carefully constructed legacy. Even modern understanding of ancient Egypt has been shaped by Ramses' choices. His monuments survived better than those of other rulers, giving him a louder voice in history. Archaeologists uncover his name repeatedly, carved over earlier kings' inscriptions, reused stones carrying his titles, and reliefs celebrating victories that defined his narrative. This dominance in the archaeological record explains Why Ramses feels larger than life today. History hears him more clearly because he ensured his voice would echo. Yet behind the grandeur lies a complex figure, a ruler who balanced fear and stability, propaganda, and diplomacy, ambition, and restraint. Ramses was neither purely a conqueror nor merely a builder. He was a strategist who understood that control required consistency, repetition, and belief. His success teaches a timeless lesson. Power lasts longest when it is seen everywhere, accepted by many, and rarely questioned in the end. Ramses II did not create an empire that lasted forever, but he created an image that did. Long after armies vanished and borders shifted, his statues still watched the Nile. His temples still caught the rising sun, and his name still defined what it meant to be a pharaoh. Ramses' legacy reminds us that history is not only about what happened, but about what survived, what was remembered, and what was carved deeply enough to resist time. Ramses II stands at the center of ancient history not because he conquered everything, but because he ensured he would never be forgotten. He understood that true power was not only the ability to rule, but the ability to shape memory, belief, and identity through monuments, rituals, wars, diplomacy, and carefully crafted stories. He placed himself into the landscape of Egypt and into the minds of its people, making his presence feel permanent even when time moved forward. He ruled during a moment when the ancient world still functioned as a connected system, and his reign represented its peak stability before change, disruption, and collapse reshaped everything that followed. Ramses did not escape time, but he challenged it, turning stone into voice, architecture into message, and repetition into truth. His story reminds us that history is not only written by those who act, but by those who control how actions are remembered, who decide what is seen, what is repeated, and what survives. Long after his armies vanished and his empire weakened, Ramses remained not as a ruler, but as an idea, a symbol of power, ambition, and human desire to be remembered. In the end, Ramses II was not simply the greatest pharaoh of Egypt, he was one of the greatest architects of legacy the ancient world ever produced.